Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to Butterland, another Saturday edition of Butterland. Tonight we'll have Anthony Mariah Yakuda with us tonight to be discussing ANC and other interesting matters in Liberia. Hope everybody okay. Here come Mariah. Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. How are you?
I am doing okay, Paul. A little tired, as you can see. Studying
Right,
for finals ain't easy, but I'm okay. I'm good.
right. It's good to see you. It's been a while. The last time we met, it was at the office, Mr. Cummings' office. It's been a while now. And how are you? How's the study? You coming up with the best A's and what?
Right now, they're
Cum
trying to
laude?
get peace. No, but it's going well. It's okay. It's a lot. When you put in a lot of information in one year, it's very intensive, very bulky. But it's good. It's been an interesting experience.
Great. And how is the ANC?
The ANC is doing quite well. Actually, one of the most stable political parties now in the country. We know the UP is in shadows. They have their infighting with UP USA and the party on the ground. Sadly, we know about the issues Liberty Party is having. We know CDC also have their own issues within, and the ANC has been able to remain pretty stable in spite of all the attacks our leadership has been getting
Yeah,
from the political leader, the chairman, is the SG being in this bogus political case. But the party is still up and running and still stable and active. Today
right.
they had a fundraiser jamboree at the party headquarters. So the party is doing well. Very much so, still mobilizing in the counties and getting some good feedback.
Great. So, man, the thing with this ANC being a fast growing political party is that why a lot of parties now in the country are kind of jittering or scared of the, the growth of ANC because we're not seeing it in other parties. That's what all of this trouble is all about.
Definitely. And when you are new, um, you're not going to take partisans from the tree. You're not going to take, partisans from another country. It's going to come from existing parties, or people who have not joined parties before, but people who supported previous parties. So a combination of both partisans from other parties and non-partisans or supporters of other parties or people who have not been engaged in politics before, you tend to attract them. And so people will start leaving, people will start coming over, and no party likes to see that happen to them, where the partisans are going to another party. But it's really also about the messaging that the ANC has been pushing, the message of real change, of being an alternative, the leadership that Mr. Cummings has provided, that the Liberian people are seeing. So it really it bothers other parties. I remember even when we formed the CPP, they were so intentional about putting the agreement that partisans should not leave from one party to the other. And I told them, I said, look, you cannot stop people's association. What we can say is before a partisan leaves, they should show a letter of resignation and you should just inform the other party out of courtesy that, oh, your partisan or your lawmakers has interest in coming to join us. Because at the time there was a huge movement of people to the ANC, so they were all afraid, and they wanted to ensure that the partisans stay in the party and ANC, doesn't get the partisans. But there's a lot of attraction. I mean, we got almost about I think three lawmakers from the UP who joined the ANC. So they're scared, but that's just how it works when there's a new kid on the block, when a new Jew moving a community. Wait a minute. He said, if you look
So
here,
yeah, so with all of this trouble, and we want to know from my listening audience, they want to know who is this powerful woman that been described, the pepper bird, the sharp voice. Who is Moriah? We want to tell
oh,
who is this Counselor Moriah? Is that Counselor Anthony? Who is Moriah?
attorney. I don't want to impersonate. I'm still an attorney.
Anthony, okay.
Oh my gosh. Just a regular Liberian woman who doesn't like to see, injustice or see things going wrong and be silent about it. And I was talking to my dad this morning. It's funny because he was saying how people could be asking him, "You sure Mariah that your daughter? Because the way her mouth sharp and you can't even talk." Because my dad's not that fiery person. Um, and he was laughing and he was telling me, he's like, I can tell you, yeah, that her mom, Mommy Pepe thinks she broke, but at the same time, I reminded him, I said, but it's not just my mom, Mommy Pepe thing. You remember when I was still a kid, one of the first books you gave me was Martin Luther King, Drunk Mayor for Justice. And that book really opened my eyes to just being a voice for, people. And it introduced me to, MLK, Martin Luther King. I know he was nonviolent, which I am as well, but he was very vocal about the plight of, African Americans and trying to see that something changes. So I was reminding my pa, I said, you gave me that book, and that actually was the beginning of me just having this desire to seek change, that if something is not being done, or something is wrong, or the issues of injustice, and just use your voice and speak about it. And that's really all I do. And sometimes people threaten you, they rely on your silence for things to continue the way it is, and I'm like, that's
Wow.
not gonna happen. But
Wow.
that's who Mariah is, just someone who speaks out when she sees
Right.
something going wrong.
Great. Before we continue, I just wanted to say, John, our brother, Jordan Fire, who is in Sweden, he is one of
Hey,
our co-hosts here.
Right.
Welcome back. Right. So, Mariah, most people in Liberia call you the mother of CPP. Why?
really?
Yes. They say everything took place in your house and they call it as dry rest. You want to tell why you have been considered the mother of CPP? They say the
Oh,
ideas came from you or from few friends, but the breath
and
came from at your house.
well, I can take credit for the idea. The idea came from Boyka Jaliba, and
Okay.
he spoke to a few people, including me, and of course, I bought into it. But yes, the first meeting we had was at my house, and I remember my auntie who used to cook for us made dry rice, so we called it the dry rice assembly. But it was at my apartment on the Old Road, specifically where they have the old IPA building. It's not
Mm-hmm.
apartment buildings. And at the time I was living there, and we had the first meeting, and pretty much discussed the concept of the CPP and the idea around bringing opposition parties together. At the time I was still, it was just after the elections, and I had just supported the UP. I had not joined the ANC. I not even met Mr. Cummings at the time. And
Right.
so we just talked because Paul, the first time I heard about Joshua trying to run for president was 2004, 2005, and I knew then and there that he would never make a good president for Liberia.
Good.
I just had it in my spirit that this person, as much as we love him for his football, career and excellence, but he didn't come across as a person who could lead the country, as a leader. And I asked, what has he really led effectively? And trust me, I was in high school, and I knew then and there that we would never make a good president. So when he got elected 2018, I just said to myself, if we don't create an alternative, for 2023 and start working towards it now, we're doomed. And when Boyka brought up the idea about getting the four, in fact, it was the three top opposition parties, UP, LP, and ANC together, I was immediately on board because ALP was nowhere around when we started this whole CPP thing. And so we had the first meeting at my place. We had another meeting at Bella Casa, where we invited, others, and they came on board. And then we divided ourselves into teams to go and meet with the political leaders and
Right.
sell this idea to them. And Yafa Bakber, who was with the ANC, was we each person from one party would lead the team. So he led the team to go and meet Mr. Cummings. I was on that team. It was me, it was Yafa, it was Manipeka Dumore, it was Stephen Johnson, but I was the only woman on
Okay.
that group. And so we also had another team that had to go meet with um, the late Councillor Bronsky. That team, I think, was led by Delon. And then we had another team that had to go meet with Omen Boycott. So, but at the same time, I think there was also conversations going on among themselves. And so we went to that meeting with Mr. Cummings at his foundation office and we told him about the idea and he immediately was on board. The only thing he said, which typical Mr. Cummings, was, "You're put it in writing and let's see how, your intent to do this. Like, I think it's a great idea, but give us the hows." And so Boyka at the time drafted something and sent it to Mr. Cummings and all the other political leaders, and he was the only person who responded
Wow.
and wrote, like literally wrote down his feedback and invited Boyka for them to discuss, his feedback and stuff. So he's been engaged from day one. But yeah, so that's the history of the CPP.
The CPP. So now we understand being the only female more than so you the mother of the CPP.
Actually, I wasn't the only female
Okay.
amongst them, but I think I was the only female in Liberia at the time.
Okay.
Because when we started the idea of CPP, I know Muna Fahad, Carl Kato, they were all part of it because some of them even called on the phone during the meeting from the diaspora.
Okay.
So there were other women who were involved, but I was just the only person on the ground at the time. So I was the one amongst all the guys. But yeah, I'm actually surprised to hear that because it's the first time I've heard that I'm called the mother of CPP. But it also speaks to why I'm really so passionate about the CPP issue and why I'm really just upset about the fact that these false allegations came out because I know that nothing of such happened, and that this was just a ploy to get back at Mr. Cummings because he stood up to the Unity Party and intended for us to go through the process. And the only way they could get out of that process was to attack the CPP agreement and say, "Oh, it was forced. It wasn't what we agreed on." And I think that's despicable. I think that is old, dirty politics that has no place or should have no place in our political dispensation. And that's why I'm really upset with the UP because I know that that's their regular propaganda. It's just based on lies and people ask, why am I always at their throats? Why am I always? And I put that at their feet because they're the puppet masters. The ALP is just the puppet.
Right. So before we bring in our brother Jody, just want to say to our audience, please share the link. It's important that people get to know the most powerful woman within ANC. They call her the pepper bird, the hard talk woman, the sharp mouth woman. She is on our platform today. Mark, you want to welcome Mariah?
Sis Mariah, I want to say welcome to our European chat room.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I've been listening to you and following, you here and there, and you're very articulative, and you speak to the issue, you don't hold back. And there are few of you in our society, and I wish we have more of you in our society that will impact our young daughters, our young sisters, that, life is not just I mean, like what it is today, there's always tomorrow. Like you believe in Mr. Cummings, so I've been following you a lot, and you continue to do the hard work that you're doing. Don't hold back among the men's. You stand up for the rest of the female among the men's, and other young girls should see that if Mariah can do it, I can do it. So welcome, Mariah.
No, thank you, and I appreciate it. And just to add, uh, it's not easy. Standing up to men in our political space, it's been a predominant, and it still is a predominantly male space. And I was telling someone the other day that just being a woman is one strike, being young is another strike. So being a young woman, is two strikes already.
Yeah,
And you're in that space, and you got to fight for your voice, you got to fight for your respect, you got to fight for what is right. And I can understand why some women may not even want to be bothered with that toxic space, because they make it really toxic, that you don't want to be bothered with it. And it's by design, because they know women are not mostly confrontational towards men. And so they would rather, even when they're there, they may try to be more peaceful, or try to just not be so confrontational. And I'm like, not me. You bring it to me, I give it to you, yeah. But at the end of the day, it's really tough. It's emotionally draining. And sometimes what the truth is, and you see people intentionally twat the truth for political purposes. And it's a difficult space to be in. But I just want to say thank you, to all of you guys. And sometimes I get people reaching out to me like, "Oh, Mariah, thank you for what you're doing. Please don't stop." And I'm like, we keep doing what we're doing, because at the
but
end of the day, that's all we
but,
can.
but just a quick question. I've not been like bro for a while, but for a good while. I mean, but looking at after we had the first elected female president on the continent, and having a second vice president who, I mean, a female as a vice president, I thought that would have changed the concept with the men when it comes to women participation.
It has not, and I tell people that representation is powerful, but representation by itself does not always solve these issues of inequalities and participation. So, for example, Barack Obama was the first Black president of the U.S., and it was a powerful representation for Black boys in the U.S. and around the world. But did it change the issues that African Americans continue to face in America in terms of inequality? Not really. Because sometimes those things are structural, that the one person at the top cannot be like single-handedly change. Sometimes they can put in place policies to push that change, but usually when they've left that position, the same system fights back. And that's exactly what's happened in Liberia. The system has fought back against women participation. I mean, imagine the 30% Madame Soli under her term tried to introduce 30% female representation. It's in the neck law, but the law says endeavor to ensure. It's basically says try, so it's not mandatory. But even at that, parties don't even endeavor to ensure. They don't try, because your candidate listing should have, you should endeavor to ensure that your candidate listing has about 30% women representation. But they don't try. It's like they're kicking back at it. And I remember in the CPP agreement, we even had to include that as well, and say, that this has to be included, and to ensure that. And I remember even when we're crafting the CPP leadership, we say at the level of the executive committee, there should be, if the party is sending 5 representatives, one must be a woman. At least one must be. So we insisted and ensured that a woman should be represented. On the level of the advisory council, we insisted that you send your secretary, your political leader, your chairperson, your head of your legislative caucus, and one woman. Because what we realize is when you just put positions, most of these positions are filled by men. So if you say the political leader of the parties, except for the Liberty Party, all the political leaders of the parties are men. If you see the chairpersons of the parties, all the chairpersons of the parties are men. If you see the chairperson of the legislative caucus, all the chairpersons of the legislative caucuses are men. So you end up having all men on the advisory council or on that leadership structure. So we included in at least in another woman, right?
Right.
So that ensured that you have female representation on all of the structures of the CPP. And it was by design, it was intentional, it was because some of us fought for it. I was part of the drafting, the evaluation committee of the CPP framework before it was sent to the lawyers. And we had long discussions, arguments, going back and forth, trying to build consensus about some of these. And I was there as well. And there were other women, Reverend Scepter, Ms. Yu and stuff. But at the end of the day, we were able to get that done. So yes, I understand when people say, but we had a female president, we now have a female vice president. Why are these still the issues? We need to understand that there are still structural issues that limit female participation. And I told someone one time, and I said, let me just simplify it to you. I remember during the 2017 elections, I asked one of the guys, and they were complaining, oh, women don't want to contest. And I said, if you hire a wife, say she wanted to run in Sebokon, and she had to go there for 3 to 4 months to campaign. He's like, who should lead the children with? And
Wow.
I'm like, that alone prevents women from getting into these political spaces, because at the end of the day, childcare is entirely left to the woman. It's not to say, oh, the man should be able to handle this responsibility with the children while the woman go. But if that man were going to go camping 4 months in a village, nobody will ask him who you leaving the children with. And so we also have to look at the issues of funding. Men
That's
are
right.
generally more financially able than women are, especially to fund political campaigns and fundraisers for political campaigns. That's also a barrier to women participation. And so there's a whole list of structural issues that just having one woman at the top does not change, which is why it's important that we have more women in the legislature, that we have more women in the executive, that we have more women on the judiciary, because when you have that collectively, you can easily implement laws and policies that tend to address these structural barriers.
Right. So you have one of the viewer here agree with you. Let me show this. It's we need more men to promote more female participation. So you got people in agreement with you here. Now, so bandwidth. Let's move
But let
on
me
to.
just let me just make a point there.
Okay.
That's a good point. But if we entirely rely on men to promote female representation, that may not necessarily happen, because most men feel like any female representation is taken away from their representation, right?
Yeah.
So even if you say you have 5 persons to nominate, every woman you nominate is one man less, and they don't easily accept that. But I agree that yes, men too should promote female representation, but it also have to make it legal. We have to make it mandatory. We have to make it binding, and that's why we have to implement these laws, and we have to support the implementation of these laws, especially the 30% female representation. And I tell people all the time, we always fall for the propaganda that, oh, you can give women this thing easier on the silver platter. It is not easier on the silver platter by doing 30% representation. Blacks in this country, when there is such a huge gap, that is between um unequal groups, where one group is so far ahead than the other.
Yeah.
In order to bridge that gap, you have to give them these affirmative actions that will kind of bring them closer here. So if you look at African Americans in the US, there was a huge gap in the education of African Americans versus whites or Caucasians. And so they instituted affirmative actions for education, that if the requirement for admission into a university is such that a white person and a black person has the same requirement, you should take the black person. And or even if the black person is a little less, than the white person, take the black person, because if you got 20,000 white persons in the school and you
Yeah.
only got 500 black person, that's already, an inequality, huge gap. It's the same thing with women representation. Look in the legislature today. How many women in the Senate? We have two women out of 30 men, out of 30 members. So you got 28 men to two women. If those women, Senator Lawrence and Senator Kane, decided to put a bill on the table that supports women, how do they lobby to get it passed? Because it's by votes, it's by majority.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, you don't have, if it's just off of the gender, you don't have the number of women to pass any law in the House or in the Senate. So you only got two women in the Senate. How do you pass these laws that affect women? How do we institute laws? So one of the things that I was talking about the other day was just some of our current laws on the books are so gender biased. For example, when you divorce or separate, the children automatically, the father gets custody. Automatically, like that's first custody in Liberia.
Right.
Once you're married, the man gets custody. It doesn't matter the age of the child, it doesn't matter until you can prove that he's not capable,
Oh,
the father gets custody. That is something that men at the time in the 70s, because the domestic relations law was done in the 1970s,
yeah.
men again were predominantly those in the legislature. And they
Right.
made that law to protect themselves. That, oh, if she won't leave me, she's not carrying the children. She will leave the children with me. How do you
So,
change those laws? How do
so
you make it more equal? You need more women in the House or the Senate to do that.
great. So this is what brings us to the main topic tonight, the kind of change that we need in Liberia. And you've been working with Mr. Cummings for a while now as the chief of staff, so you know him better than,
The former.
yes, the people they follow us. You are the insider. But before we come to that, they said that girl, that woman, to see Mr. Cummings, you have to pass through her. So there's so many things about Mariah that the most talk about Mariah. But the question here, I got a simple question for you before Mark come in. And this question is simple. It's very, very simple. Who is Mr. Alexander B. Cummings?
Oh, um, it is a simple question. Mr.
Very.
Cummings is, you know, one of the most hardworking person I've met, and I was on the show with Anthony Sie the other day on Focus on Liberia, and he asked similar question, and I told him, and he said, "Oh, but all the people you work with, you said Mr. Cummings can work harder than them." I said they're also hardworking, but he's one of the most hardworking people I've known. He's also very humble. Mr. Cummings treats people with respect. One of the things I've learned from him was, treat your subordinates and your juniors the same way you treat your colleagues. Give them the same respect. Mr. Cummings believes in the dignity of people. Even if he's telling you no, sometimes he said we get all these requests. When you're calling people to say, we cannot help them at this time, do it in a way that they don't feel bad about themselves. Like do it in a way that they keep their dignity. Even if someone comes to ask to help them to pay their rent or to pay their children's school fees or whatever request they have, if you cannot help them at the time, say it to them in a way that they retain their dignity, that you don't make them feel like beggars, you don't make them feel like they're less than, a human being. And he's very, even when you dismissing someone, he always says, if you're firing someone from the job or you're dismissing, like do it in a way that they keep their dignity. And so he's very conscious about it. He's very respectful of people, very humble. Mr. Cummings drives himself sometimes. I know when he comes, here to the US, he tries not to do it like I remember one day he actually just walked, he went for a walk around Cinco, and he said, I really like going for a walk, but I found out that people are now starting to recognize me. So by the time I start walking, everybody will be honking or in their cars, Mr. Cummings, and stuff like that. But that's how simple it is. He likes, doing like his own simple stuff, buying his food, driving himself, taking a walk in his neighborhood. Mr. Cummings is a visionary. His vision for Liberia is clear and to the point. He knows exactly what the problems are, and he knows what the solution to those problems are. And one of the things he's always tried to do, even as opposition, is whenever he condemns the government, he gives recommendations.
Yeah.
If the government didn't do this, he would say these are some of the recommendations. With so whether it's the economy, whether it's the fight against COVID, whether it's a lot of issues. Every time he condemns the government, he gives recommendations on how to do it because he's a problem solver. He's a visionary, and his vision for Liberia and how to address some of our issues are very clear and detailed. He's also a consummate professional. I mean, for over 40 plus years, he's worked in systems and structures in corporate America, and part of being a professional is he has these tendencies that are not necessarily common in Liberia or accepted. For example, Mr. Cummings is never late. I know we got Liberian time, but he does not like being late.
So,
If
so, 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 Mariah, sorry for interrupting you
that's okay,
because I mean we got a lot of stuff to cover.
right?
Don't you think I live in Sweden, right? And I know where Mr. Cummings, the kind of where he come from, as a manager in the corporate world, and sometimes they are the first on job and they are the last to
That's to
leave.
leave.
So don't you think that present a fear with the kind of culture we've been having in Liberia? The boss wake up anytime, he go to work, he go home anytime he feel like. Don't you think those are some of the fear for which the people they reject Mr. Cummings?
You know, that is a good point, and I won't say the people. I will say the system
Yes. Thanks for the
because
correction. That
yeah,
the
the
political
system,
elite, the
the
establishment.
political elites, the establishment is set up in a way that benefits them, that they get to do whatever they want. Like you said, they go to work when they want, they leave when they want. And here is this person who is coming and showing a different way of doing things and showing, being the example. If Mr. Cummings says, don't be late to meetings, he's never late at meetings. He's always the first there. If at events, he's always there. I remember there was one time he said, start the event. We said, Chief, but the people here, he said, start the event. We said we're starting at 2 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock start. People will start to understand that when they say event is starting at 2, it starts at 2. If he says, leaders should be able to take care of the followers and ensure they're okay and their well-being, is being met before they look, out for themselves, he exhibits that. Mr. Cummings goes to events, he's the last person to eat. When he said leaders eat last, and people was like, oh, that means blah. It's like, no, because there is actually a book that talks about leaders eating last, where you ensure that your people are taken care of as a leader. And he always says, if every time you go to event and they serve the boss or the political leader or the big man first,
Mhm.
that person doesn't care whether there's enough food for everybody else. But if
Okay.
you know that you will be eating last, you will know that there should be enough food, because if you don't provide enough food for the people, there will be none left for you to eat.
Mhm.
So most times he's always the last to get his food, because for him that's just symbolic to the fact that as a leader you ensure that everybody else needs are met, and you prioritize the needs of your people before yourself. So I completely agree. This is why the system has been fighting back, because he has been able to show that you can actually do things differently. And I'll tell you something. He said one time, he said, if the boss tells the employees to be at work at 9:30 and the boss is at work at 9:35, everybody will come at no, he says, if you said come to work at 9:30 and you as
Mhm.
the boss come to work at 9:35, everybody will come to work like 5 minutes before you do. But if you tell the people to come to work 9:30 and you did 9:25, everybody will be there by 9:20.
Yeah.
So you as the boss have to set the example.
The
And
example.
once the people see, if you tell your people don't be corrupt, don't put your hand in the cookie jar, and they see your hand in that cookie jar, they will put a hand in the cookie jar too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of our employees or most Liberians, they don't learn by what you say. They learn by what they see you do.
Okay.
We
So
follow
on
our leaders. So
so
yeah.
so, uh so under Mr. Cummings' leadership, do you think, okay, under his leadership, this ANC leadership, do you think Mr. Cummings is that person that going to take, I mean, action against his cabinets for being late on job and being, I mean, negligent when it comes to the job, do what they want to do. Do you think he's that kind of person?
Oh
Explain
yeah.
to the Liberian people.
Oh yeah. People's like, oh, Mr. Cummings, it's so easy going. Mr. Cummings is so, calm, but he's very firm, very firm. I remember he even people in the party have said it. There was this lady in the party who was actually active and engaged, and everybody knew her and stuff. And there was an issue where it was shown that she had done something, and everybody came to beg for her. And Mr. Cummings is like, nope, gotta expel her. And people were like, wow, but that's just who he is. He honestly believes that you should reward good behavior
Hmm.
and you should punish bad behavior. And he's saying that in Liberia, we have a culture where we do not punish bad behavior. In fact, we sometimes enable bad behavior. Someone gets an appointed position and you go to them and be begging for, money and making them father of the year, mother of the year, so they can kind of support this fundraiser. And that is like, but do you know how much this person is making? What do you expect them to get the money from you? And enabling them to steal to be able to support you and all these requests that you're making. And we even have this thing where if the person leaves the job and they've not enriched themselves, we call them stupid. Kind of other stupid one there. The guy that stupid one, she was a whole minister, he was a whole minister. He even made use of the opportunity. Then yeah, now he walking by line. He even get a car. He even be a house. We enable bad behavior. We push people to do that. And for him, it's like that's part of why the country is where it is today. We need to get to a point where we reward good behavior and we punish bad behavior. So yes,
Mariah, to a point of what you just said, and it come with a question. Don't you think that has to do with the kind of institutional structure we got in Liberia? If, for example, one served as a good minister, he leaving the job, what his benefit? And then two, what's the benefit on the job while he's on the job, so that he doesn't engage into this kind of a behavior to enrich himself? Don't you think it comes with the institution that we have?
it actually comes with the fact that we don't hold people accountable. When you are appointed or you have a job, that job comes with responsibilities and it comes with benefits, your salaries, your benefits and other things, whether it's scratch card or gasoline for transportation. All of those things are stated. You're not supposed to get anything.
Why should the government be buying squash cards for ministers? Why?
No, so I will explain that to you because
Okay,
we don't have like a landline system in Liberia.
okay.
Where it's whether it's run by the government in partnership with a private company, or where people have home lines. I remember, sometimes in the US, or where the office has lines that you can call from office to office. That every office has a line, and you can communicate work related matters, or people can call directly. Like we don't have that in Liberia. So in order to
Mariah,
ensure.
I'm going to interrupt you because you're saying something a little bit irritating. So you want to tell me under the 12 years leadership of the UP government, just let us talk about Monrovia. So there isn't sufficient, I mean, adequate landline that people use from one ministry to place call. Are you telling me this?
Nope, that's not. So people use
And the
cell
same,
phones.
and the same, and the same UP, because Vice Ome Joe, Uncle Joe, I let her call him, he was vice president, and the same UP people advocating for today to come to power. If they couldn't provide common thing like telephone service for government ministry or just for Montserrat County, explain that to me, man, please.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. There are none. And so people are using scratch cards, using cell phones. And so to use these cell phones for government work or business work, you have to provide communication. And in providing communication, you have to provide the scratch cards for them to use. The same thing with gasoline. Um, um, Gas slips. You have to provide gasoline or fuel for vehicles to do the ministry's work or to do the company's work. And so that's part of what it is to effect the work. And yes, telecommunications in Liberia now is restricted to cell phones. So I know Lip Telco on the UP government has started, but it hasn't been. I know they started the internet fiber optics. Most of the wires were stolen at the time. So it's really the private companies, Lone Star and Cellcom, that are providing telecommunication services
So,
to
so,
Liberia.
so, so why you think it's going to be like under a Cummings leadership?
Well,
How you think it's going to be like?
I think that's going to change and improve actually and get better. I know that because, Mr. Cummings is the only political leader who has visited all 15 counties
Right,
since 2018. All 15 counties.
right,
And I know that there's sometimes we're on the road and there's some areas that don't even have cell phone coverage. You're
right.
driving for 45 minutes to an hour and your phone coverage is off. You can make calls, you can receive calls, which is quite dangerous because if the car breaks down, you can call for help, you can call
Right.
people. And he said that telecommunications coverage across the country is one of the things under his building a 21st century Liberia plan that he's gonna prioritize, because what that does is with telecommunications and internet services across the country, you open it up those areas for economic development. You open it up for basic, marketing stuff. We have, of course, roads for farm to market roads. You need that, but someone can sit in the village if they have cell phone coverage and call, someone in Monrovia and say, "Oh, I have a farm that I'm doing pepper and I'm
Okay.
about to harvest. So,
Oh,
I can be a supplier." And the person can say, "Oh, sure." So you can conduct businesses just from there instead of the people doing subsistence farming and just to eat. They can now get into, more agriculture. And he talks about agribusinesses and agriculture and mechanized agriculture. That's something he wants to prioritize as well. So that you
yeah,
open up. But if someone is in a village that does not even have internet, cell phone coverage, and they have to walk up the hill to be shaking the phone at it to see if they can find coverage and stuff. It really
yeah.
affects, the economic
Okay,
processes in the country, especially in terms of people selling their goods and services and having access to a larger market and all of that stuff. But yeah, so
okay.
that's something that he's very technology in terms of telecommunications, internet and stuff is part
Okay,
of his
okay.
plan.
Brother Paul can take over now. We go with the
Right.
agenda. Okay.
Sarah has some technical problem with my laptop. It just went bloom.
Oh, that's
And if
okay.
this thing happen, I love the way Mr. Farr handled the show and Mariah. And that's what brought us to this all you people talking about internet connectivity. It lead us to Mr. Cummings' vision for Liberia. Is there any way that you could just lay it out for our listening out there? Why is Mr. Cummings so different from the others? What his vision for this wonderful country that people are jittering about?
So, Mr. Cummings' vision, sometimes I like to discuss it, or we discuss it on the six pillars.
Okay.
One of his first pillar is combating corruption. Nobody can say they can eliminate corruption, but you can combat corruption and minimize it to the point where you have control over people's use of public funds, and that's putting in place those structures that needs to be done. We also call it the clean hands governance, and part of that is he's going to prioritize the establishment of an anti-corruption court as a specialized court for corruption matters in cases where he will, and he said it before, that where the evidence points to is where they're going to go, and regardless of who it points to and the evidence that exists, they're going to prosecute people who steal from government to enrich themselves. So that's part of it. He's also going to focus on closing all of the loopholes in revenue generation agencies and other institutions in government where people can easily make use of the system and enrich themselves. He also talked about paying people a living wage. He said if
Mhm.
you're not paying the policeman a living wage, he's going to stop people cars on the street and take bribes from them, even if they're in violation of traffic laws. If you're not paying the teacher a living wage, he's going to take bribes from students for grades. If you're not paying the health worker a living wage, he's going to take the drugs from the hospital and sell it. And yes, those are crimes, and those are things that should not be happening. But in order to address corruption, you also have to pay people a living wage so that whatever you're paying them can take them through the month and help them
Mhm.
take care of their families, instead of having them to resort to some of these corrupt practices. And it's not that sometimes you pay people all the money, but they'll still be corrupt. But when you have those institutions in place and those accountability measures in place that can track, you know, um, people's activities and see if they're stealing government funds, then you can easily hold them accountable through the corruption courts and the audits and LACC's CC investigation, stuff like that. So combating corruption is a key part of his platform and his plan. The second part, pillar is also building a 21st century Liberia. And what does that mean? There's several factors under that, right? So one of the things that he wants to emphasize under that is infrastructure and technology. um, Part of why Liberia is behind a lot of countries is countries have been able to go through their industrialization stage, and now they went to the service delivery stage. Now they're into the technological stage. Liberia, we've not even gotten to the industrialization stage yet. And the good thing about it is because of technology, you can actually combine your industrialization stage with your service delivery and technology stage. And so, what he intends to do is use infrastructure and technology to push Liberia into the 21st century. For example, focus on low cost power. We've focused on, of course, electricity with LEC, but also
Mhm.
he intends to look at alternative methods of electricity, solar energy, clean energy, wind energy, and other kinds of energy that are low cost and that are also easily accessible to
Um,
occupants.
Mariah, I want to ask you because you talk about six pillar, and we won't. I won't. For me, if we let you to go through all the pillars without asking some question, then it's gonna be like
So let
everything.
me no, let me run through the pillars and then you mark the questions and then you can
Okay.
ask them when I'm done. So that we don't, yeah,
Okay.
because I'm just going through it briefly. We've already done with combating corruption, and so low cost power. Under that also is clean and safe drinking water, and of course roads, and internet connectivity as we discussed earlier, because that improves the economy and economic
Mhm.
activities outside of Monrovia and into hard to reach places, road and internet and telephone connectivity as well. The third pillar is what he calls modernizing healthcare. And his government is going to focus mostly on primary and preventative healthcare. And part of the reason is it's not that other kinds of health issues are not important, but if you look at, and he always says the five illnesses that most Liberians tend to die from are malaria, um, high blood pressure, maternal mortality or childbirth, typhoid, and I think that's the fifth one. Most of these illnesses can be addressed at the preventative stage. You can prevent them, and there can be addressed with primary health care. And that means, for example, even with malaria, it's an issue of not only just providing mosquito nets or whatever, but also ensuring that the environment that mosquitoes thrive in don't exist. So whether it's sanitation and keeping areas clean and stuff, typhoid, the same way. So investing in primary and preventive health care is part of his modernizing healthcare plan, and then also medical technology and advancement for other illnesses that people usually will go outside Liberia for, to address in Liberia. The fourth pillar briefly is what he calls creating job and revitalizing the economy. And this is in no particular order, by the way. It's just kind of how I remember them. And this is important to him because over roads, 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 but Mr. Cummings' plan is really jobs, jobs, jobs. And if you look at
Right.
all of his pillars, they're all tied to jobs. They're all tied to creating jobs, whether it's modernizing healthcare, whether it's, building a 21st century Liberia in terms of creating access to infrastructure and technology and low cost energy. It is all based on job creation. And so revitalizing the economy is part of his job create pillars. And under
Mhm.
that, he also wants to focus on agriculture in terms of not just basic agriculture, but mechanized agriculture and also agribusiness.
Right.
Investing in the value chain production of agriculture is very key because he also knows that it provides more jobs and it also makes Liberia more food sustainable. So if you're producing cassava, how do you, translate that cassava into fufu flour? How do you translate that cassava into farina? How do you translate that cassava into other things that comes out of cassava? So not just the raw material or not just the food produce, but how do you create companies? How do you create businesses that then change those raw materials and stuff into products that can be sold in Liberia and that can provide food for Liberians and stuff. So definitely, that's one of the things he's going to focus on under revitalizing the economy. He's also going to focus on new areas like ecotourism, and I'll talk about this when I talk about how he intends to increase the budget to $1 billion. But ecotourism for him is very important because unlike tourism that is based on five-star hotels and high class areas and skyscrapers or buildings with escalators and elevators and all of these things, ecotourism is basic. It's basically about nature. I don't know if you guys are familiar with, for example, Lebasa Eco Lodge in
Yeah.
Liberia.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly, something like
Mhm.
those resorts. Because they don't require generators or fuel or cost intensive activities. They're using the wood and the bamboo and materials from in the same area. They're having the beddings are like lapas, that you can that are cheap and easily accessible. Just simple things. And what that does is it also opens up your tourism sector. I mean, there are countries around us like Sierra Leone and Ghana, and the tourism sector has boomed because not only are they attracting tourists into the country, they're also doing less cost intensive investments in ecotourism that is attracting people. People come, they know that when they go into Lebasa Eco Lodge or they go into Nana Lodge or they go into other areas that don't have all of the luxury, they know what to expect. They know they got to carry their insect repellent. They know they got to be prepared to walk in the bush. They know they got to go hiking or what they call hiking. So they expect all of these things. And they also know not to expect five-star hotels, not to expect, skyscrapers and stuff. So because of our society and because of our lack of funds in investing in tourism, his focus will be on ecotourism. And the other pillar is expanding education. So we know that Mr. Cummings owns and has and runs a school in Liberia called the Alex Cummings Math, Science, and
So-
Technology
Mhm.
STEM education. And he's very passionate about STEM education because that is the path to a more modern and technology country. Because STEM, the math, the sciences, technology is something that a lot of Liberians have not gotten into. We are into the social, the arts,
yeah,
sociology, political science, economics and stuff, and all of those other areas. And so diverting attention and investment into science, math, and technology is something that his platform is focused on. And so, education and training, TVET programs for disadvantaged youth is also
Yeah.
part of his focus, and for adult literacy education. So, under his plans, education is going to be on STEM. It's going to be on trainings, vocational training, because he also, he says this all the time. He said, we got a lot of lawyers. We need more carpenters. We need more plumbers. We need more mercenaries. We need more building construction. We need more
yeah.
technical, skills
Right.
as well. So
And
just invest in the education in that, where even if students are graduating from high school, they're graduating with these skills. I know Don Bosco
Sure.
used to do it before, where you had an elective, you choose some skill training, and so he wants to invest in schools. And I know there's a new school that's open, and they're doing that with their 10th to 12th graders. You pick a skill, a vocational training skill that you learn, and then when you graduate, you also have a certificate in that. So whether it's mechanic, whether it's agriculture, carpentry, all of those things. So that's part of his
It's,
education
it's
plan. And
very,
lastly,
yeah.
engaging minds and hearts. And the reason this is important to him is Liberians have gone through a lot. And to be able to keep the country together and united, you have to
Mhm.
engage the minds and hearts of the people. And this means investing in sports. Sports, as we all know, is a unifier. Unfortunately, I thought under a footballing president, we would have really invested in sports. And it's interesting that the one thing that he's good at is the worst we've been at, as a country since he became president. I mean, Lone Star has lost almost all their games. There's no zeal. I remember how there was so much zeal and passion around football in Liberia, and it's not. So, I know a few local teams, and the football president Rash is doing a pretty good job trying to get more local teams active in the local leagues. But
Mhm.
internationally, our performance as a national team has been dismal. And so, part of engaging minds and hearts is Mr. Cummings' investment in sports, investment in culture. Um, Most Liberians don't even, know the culture, especially people like for some of us who grew up in Monrovia, and didn't really have time to grow up in the interior and see some of the cultural practices and stuff. And yet there are some cultural practices that are not necessarily healthy or helpful, but generally just invest in our culture and having, Liberians have a sense of identity, working with religious leaders and having them, preach messages of unity and trying to unify and reconcile our country. So that part of the plan is important to Mr. Cummings because it's what he calls um, uh, 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 um, the soft plan, because that speaks to minds and hearts. That speaks to changing attitudes. That speaks to how we look at ourselves as Liberians and how we value ourselves. Part of why Ghana has been able to progress as much as they have in the last 20 years is because Ghanaians started with the belief in themselves. We Ghanaians, we are the best. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yeah,
20
that has been,
Ghanaians, we Ghanaians,
that
we
has,
are the best.
So
We're the best.
uh,
Mariah,
no,
So once you believe in
Paul
yourself and you
gentlemen,
start with that, everything else falls into place.
right? Let me hold on, Mark, before Mariah, if you don't mind, we nearly 1 hour to spend because this getting very interesting and to spend additional maybe 20 minutes with us,
No
if you don't
problem.
mind.
No problem.
Great.
Mariah, I just
Yes.
want to pick up from how they call it, something that you said when it comes to education and the youth, right?
Yes.
And there's something going on in Liberia now, and this is not now, but it's been going on for a good while.
Mm.
Our youth have been, which is the human resource for the country, right? The youth are the human resource of the country.
Mm.
And right under the eyes of the former president, Ellen Johnson, 12 years, there was nothing done for when it comes to rehabilitation of the youth. And most of them now today, they are engaged into the drugs, which is a epidemic in the country. And it is not just this current president alone. So, what do you think it's going to look like under Mr. Cummings? Is he going to put in the rightful mechanism and the rightful people to address this issue? Because you got almost, I don't know the number, but I want to believe that number is in the tens of thousands. So, you as a with a law experience, what do you think the problem is, and how Mr. Cummings going to address this issue with the flow of drugs in our country across the entire nation?
And that's what I was going to speak to. It's good you mentioned that. So, the issue of the disadvantaged youth, who now we generally refer to as Zogos, you're right. It did not only start under this government, but it got worse under this government. And part of that is every time you have a breakdown, a complete breakdown in the system, a complete breakdown in implementation of the laws on the books,
Right.
a complete breakdown in people doing whatever they want to do. These are some of the effects of it. So, Madam Sirleaf government was not perfect, and I worked in her government as well. I still think there's a lot more that could have been done, but they were able to control the issues of drug trafficking in Liberia. They were able to control the issue of sale of drugs. Right now, there's a proliferation of drugs in the country, easy access to drugs. And so these young people are getting addicted to it. Young people, I mean, I know that Madam Yusuf had posted something on social media one day. She said, most of the communities I'm going, I'm seeing this shoe hanging on the LEC wire.
But but
But
but
let me learn. Let me learn.
yeah,
She said,
we,
I'm
we
seeing.
we we are from the same camp. I'm from the ANC, but this has not been spoken about a lot from the opposition camp to talk about this issue of drugs in the country.
I will
But
get
only
there.
when, uh-huh,
I'll get there. And she
okay.
said, we see this shoe hanging on the wire in most communities. What is it? And I can tell you, like more than half of the comments under that post said, oh, that means they're selling drugs in the community. Oh, that means they're selling drugs in the community. And I said to myself, so people actually know these things. That means the police know these things. What's going on? So it seems like every community now you have a ghetto that they're selling drugs in or something, and it's gotten so prevalent. That is part of the biggest issues. Of course, yes, there's rehabilitation for those who've already been addicted to it, but there's also implementation of the laws and strengthening the laws on the issue of drug. And some of our leaders apparently are part of this drug issue, that they're working with some of these drug leader wards and stuff. And I know there was some accusation the other day, but even some of the officials at the DEA, the drug enforcement agency, that they are the ones who are helping, like when they go and confiscate these drugs or whatever, they go and give it to some of the people they know who are dealing the drugs, and they make money off of it. And there's all of this news around that needs to be
But
authenticated and also
but
investigated. But I wouldn't say the opposition has not been addressing this issue. I know that we have Senator Deno's from the opposition who's tried to open a rehabilitation center for them. There's also Representative Thomas Goshua from the ANC who's spoken against the issue of drugs and even is putting a bill before the House for them to make the sale of drug a first degree felony,
yeah,
that
well,
it should carry a penalty of life imprisonment for those who are selling drugs. So there are all of these efforts around addressing the issue of drugs from the opposition standpoint. So I just wanted to
exactly.
clarify that.
Okay. But has there been any call? Because looking at how they call it, our legislature, there are a lot of lawmakers from the opposition. Had there been any call placed on the DEA, the director for DEA, or the police director, or the justice minister to address this issue?
I don't have that information, so I wouldn't want to speak to it. But I believe the DA has been called to the legislature, and if they haven't, I think it's important that they do that. This is a serious issue, but I know Representative Thomas Goshua from the ANC has been actively speaking against this issue of drugs, and even having the House, which is a
Okay.
member of, to pass the bill on increasing the penalties for drug trafficking and sale of drugs in Liberia, drug dealing, basically.
Okay.
There's a question for you, Mariah.
Yes. I thought we already had a bicentennial going on.
We already had Mariah, you
But let me answer the
Answer
guy.
the question.
I'm not sure, the bicentennial, some people believe so let me just say this. I'm of the school of thought that Liberia's bicentennial is actually 2047, 1847 to 2047, because that was when we gained our independence. The current bicentennial that's being celebrated is the bicentennial of the arrival of the settlers in 1822, which is 1822 to 2022, 200 years. So now that this government is celebrating the bicentennial, the question confuses me because I'm not sure when he says what's Mr. Cummings' plans about Liberia's bicentennial program. It's already ongoing.
Well,
Does it mean?
when Mr. Cummings take office, maybe then we'll be heading for that 200 year mark. But Mr. Cummings won't be in office by then.
But
If
he'll not be in office by
yes.
2047. That's why I'm a little confused. Because if it was, you know, some time close, then we can say something towards that. But I also should say though, with this current bicentennial, he was invited and he attended the lunch at the SKD. And so he supports the bicentennial programs that's been going on. When he's invited, he will show up, but I'm not sure about his plans. That question was a little not too clear.
Yeah. Right.
However, something I want to pick up on. You talk about infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
And we have this something in our how to call this system, which is called county development
Fun.
fund, if I'm right. And I think the highest amount goes to the county that are more populated or big, right, in size. And if I'm right,
I'm not too sure.
okay,
I,
because
I can
looking
confirm or
at some,
deny. I don't have
okay.
the. But go ahead, ask a question.
Out of my own imagination, I think that how it's done, the bigger county get a bigger portion of the county development fund. I don't think it's divided equally. But however, my question is, with this kind of system of county development fund, some counties get like $300,000, $400,000 a year for county development fund because I've been following a few of them. And it has not gotten us anywhere because some of these counties, they need roads, they need hospital, they need local universities that will give some degrees that will teach some programs so that Morea doesn't be overcrowded and Cottington, for example, doesn't get overcrowded. So what I'm asking is that under Mr. Cummings, is he thinking about decentralization of the system that these counties will be able to generate their own revenue so that they'll be able to build their hospitals if they need it, that everything doesn't come from Monrovia? Is that something that is this something that you're aware of?
I think, and I won't say for certain, but I believe that's also part of considerations in terms of decentralizing some of this. Mostly, it's been his issues around decentralization has been around provision of services to the counties. So, for example, there are certain counties that don't even have banks. So, if you employing government workers there, they have to come down to Kakata or Nimba or counties that have banks that are closest to them, or even Monrovia, to be able to get the money and all of that stuff. Even if you something, for example, work permits or business registration or just other government services that needs to be decentralized to different counties, so people don't have to come all the way down to Monrovia or other counties that are further away. But I think also part of the county development fund, the idea behind that, Madam Sharif, was to also have counties a bit more self-sufficient, as you were saying, and to address some of the issues that are affecting those counties. Unfortunately, I believe lawmakers, because that should have been with the superintendent, and sometimes they have meetings at the county sitting. The superintendent, the citizens and stuff supposed to identify what are the pressing issues in the county and how do they use the county development fund to address some of the issues affecting the counties. But apparently now lawmakers are now using the county development funds as either campaign tool, in terms of saying, oh, it was under my term as lawmaker that this was done with the county development funds and stuff like that. So I think there's a need to evaluate the effectiveness of the county development funds, evaluate the impact on the counties as well, and if necessary, how it can be either changed, augmented, or redistributed in a more efficient and fair manner that all of the counties, get what they deserve. But I definitely think that's something he's very, very particular about in terms of decentralization.
Right. Thanks, Mariah. I mean, you done well, and I just want to divert a little bit, and then we'll come back. And I'm going to throw this question to Mark. Last night, I watched Spoon Television, and Mark,
Yes,
this
sir.
guy, I think, is Mariah Friends, Stentor Waterspoon. He started something yesterday that I feel, and the way I look at it, I think that Spoon now going to become Radio Gigati. He said something yesterday because I watched Mr. Cummings at the Temple of Justice. Unity Partisan were behind him, giving him, calling him all sort of names, even wanting to attack him. And yesterday he said something on his program that Mr. Cummings is now paying people to do forensic test for the Booker case that is happening. And Omer Barker, Benedict Cummings, and others, he's paying money for them to be sanctioned. I mean, just 2 days ago, people were shouting they even want to be. So that alone, my what you
Mhm.
think of such comment, and kept repeating the same thing, that it exciting the people, or do we say Mariah is closer to comment? Is that time that he threatening his security? It's just a thought. I was thinking on the how that play on me last night.
Thank you, Brother Paul, for that question. And later on, my dear sister, Sis Mariah, she's a lawyer and she will elaborate more, add more ingredient to what I'm going to say. Looking at what has happened in the country for the past time and the society, we still yet have that trauma in the country. And I listened to the program as well, and it was very disturbing what he said on his program. That endangers the life of Mr. Cummings and people that connected to Mr. Cummings. For example, if I retrospect rightfully, he said that Mr. Cummings, he's sometimes they say something on the show, for example, and they don't know the ramification. He said, and I quote, that Mr. Cummings is bringing sanction on people like Benedict Cummings, Joseph Boaka, Nyombli Kanga, okay? And I thought to myself, like, what is he talking? Mr. Cummings, he was referring to the Magnitsky Act. And that Magnitsky Act is an act that the American government, how do you call it, it's a Russian journalist, right, that was prosecuted and died in prison in Russia. And that's where they got that act from. And American also served prison under that particular act in Russia. But what happened is when Stanton spilled out this kind of thing on his program, it is disturbing. People already calling Mr. Cummings names, things that he has not done. And two, Mr. Cummings bringing this particular forensic, team that he employed. First of all, they forget to do that Mr. Cummings sit on the board, okay, of multinational companies. So with his name being in the newspaper in a country like Liberia, he has to fight that. It's not only about the case in Liberia. No. People watch, Front Page Africa, they got a website. You understand? That other people outside the country, they can read, oh yeah, this is Alexander Cummings. He being accused of forging document. So it's something that he has to defend. But Stanton Waterspoon, his accusation yesterday that Mr. Cummings is the one that bringing or influencing the American government. First of all, Mr. Cummings doesn't work in the American government. He's not a legislator. So how does he influence the Magnitsky Act? The American government, they have their representative in Liberia, which is the American embassy, okay? And they know everything that is going on in the country. So
It's
I found it very
20 minutes almost up, but let me
Yeah.
adjust that.
Mhm.
Sometimes I tell people, I say, why are you getting riled up about things that Stanton would say or Kev would say, and stuff on their show? They're trying to be sensational, especially Stanton. Kev, he's just a CDC mouthpiece that's always trying to protect his people. But any rational person listening will first ask themselves, Mr. Cummings that powerful? If Mr. Cummings is that powerful, then that's the man we should be making president. Because if he can tell the American government who to put on sanction, and Ben was very clear about it when he said the Magnitsky Act does not work that way. You don't just pick up the phone and call America and say, "Made a person and put a person on sanctions or put a person on sanctions." If anybody gets sanctioned by the U.S. government based on the Magnitsky Act, it's based off of things they've done. It's based off of what they've done. We've seen that with Prince Johnson. We've seen that with Barney Sherman. Those are the first two people who've been sanctioned based on the Magnitsky Act. And that's because they were able to investigate and they were able to track their activities and they were able to see that they did things that warranted them being on the sanctions. Not because of anything anybody called them to say or called them to say, put this person. And if Stanton is letting the Liberian people know that Mr. Cummings has that power, that he can pick up the phone and call someone and say that, then he's basically saying Mr. Cummings is more powerful than even George Weah, more powerful than any other person in the country.
Eh,
So when we, as ANC partisans, listen to these talk show hosts or things, and I understand, we get emotional about it and everything, but we also need to start looking at it from a different perspective. There's absolutely no way Mr. Cummings can pick up the phone and call the U.S. government and say, "Put this person on sanctions." If that's what Stanton
right.
and his panelists are trying to tell the Liberian people, then they're basically telling the Liberian people that this is the most powerful man in Liberia. And that's one of the ways to look at it. The second thing is, on the issue of Unity Party people, they're upset because CDC had people stand up at the court, the trial date before, with flyers calling boycott, um, uh, uh, um, you know, uh, uh, what was some of the things on the flyer? Indecisive leader, responsible for the breakup of the CPP, and all of those things. So they thought they could go and heckle Mr. Cummings. And it's interesting that a group of people will even call him those names. And I'm like, do you see the people around you? Do you
Right.
see the people who you're supporting? How can
Yeah.
anyone in their sound mind call him any such name when it's clear that his record is clean? It's clear that this case has been a bogus political ploy to get him out of the race. And because they're threatened by the headwaves he's made into our political space. When Mr. Cummings first came into the political space, he was an underdog. He was the person who was coming in less than 18 months to elections. He was the person who people were saying, "Oh, we don't know this man. We haven't heard about him before." Now, everybody is talking about Mr. Cummings. Mr.
Right.
Cummings' name is on every tongue, every Tessie ride, every uh, uh, that's a good point. And I'll get to it. But every taxi ride, every barbershop conversation, every salon conversation, everywhere you go, every town, village, whatever, people are talking about Mr. Cummings. And I said it on my Facebook page, the person who Ambassador Boyka had called a stranger and they've tried to push him out of the town. Now they got the town people talking about him. And I understand Liberians don't have the mindset. I'm sorry, we are a gullible people. We take things and we run with it without even assessing the facts about it or anything. But we also have the responsibility to speak against it and to let people see that, how it doesn't make sense. And every time these things happen, we as ANC partisans, we as Mr. Cummings supporters have to be able to speak out against it and say, look, all you're saying is that this man is the most powerful person because this doesn't even make sense. Or and I said the other day, UB thrives on lies for the
Yeah.
propaganda, so the CDC, and propaganda is like a balloon. If you have
Mariah.
the truth, let me just end my thought. If you have
Mhm.
the truth can easily prick that balloon and that propaganda falls flat. So, what the ANC has to the advantage is the truth. We know that all we need to do is to put out the truth. And yes, because Liberians are a gullible people, because Liberians are most Liberians are gullible, most Liberians are uneducated or illiterate. So those who should know better try to play on the intelligence of the people and try to spread false and fake information.
And
But I
that's the
get
point
that.
I was trying to
And,
make.
and I
Yeah.
get that. But it's also our responsibility to share the truth and to I would say dismantle their propaganda with the truth. That look, if you're going to tell the people that Mr. Cummings is trying to bring sanctions on Euro boycott and Yombly, what did they do? So is it, if you're saying that they did something that warrants sanctions on them, or if you're saying Mr. Cummings is the most powerful person that he can pick up the phone and call the U.S. government to put sanctions on him, what exactly are you saying to the Liberian people? And I think we should take it from that standpoint.
We got a few
But
seconds
but,
left. But before
but
you come in, I just want
yeah.
to ask, show something to Mariah and see if Mariah, Mr. Cummings will be coming to Germany, handover. Will you be coming too? Because the ANC region decided the convention, the ANC with me dance with Mr. Cummings over there in Europe were not happy. So the ladies in Europe want to show you guys that they can party too. So will you be coming for this function in July?
Um, I can say though, I mean, yes, I do still engage with the party and Mr. Cummings, but I'm his former chief of staff, so I don't know
It's
if I'll
it's an
be.
open request now.
If I'll be honest, you're trying to trick me into saying something that I can't say right now. But no, I think he will be there. I'm not sure I will be there, but I would love to be there, and we'll see what happens.
Right.
Okay. Paul, to the issue that I mean concerning the false narrative or what you call
She,
propaganda
she,
that Clinton try
she,
to run, right?
she tried to go. So yeah, give her her closing party before
Okay,
she
okay.
leave. Yeah,
Let's
Mariah. Mariah, you been good with us. Was it thanks for being on the show? You want to close up and leave good voice in the ears of our listeners before you leave?
and
Yes.
we will talk about another time.
Just 1 second. Sorry, guys. Yes, so I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for the work that you guys do, putting out Mr. Cummings' message and the message of real change. Look, we are the underdogs, and what we're doing is good work for the benefit of Liberia, for the benefit of Liberians, and not everybody will recognize it. Matter of fact, people will fight against it because change is hard. People by nature were resistant to change. Personally, I ain't like changing things a lot. I don't like changing where I stay. I don't like changing, what I eat. I don't like but generally, people are resistant to change. And so when they see someone who is, committed to changing the way we've always done things just for the better, they may not necessarily embrace it and the system will fight back. But it's for us, those who believe in that messaging, his soldiers, his supporters, to not lose hope, regardless of everything they throw at us. Look at us. We're still standing and still standing strong. And that's it. That's exactly what we should continue to do because that's not what they want to see. They want to see us weak. They want to see us cry. They want to see us disoriented. They want to see us disorganized. But all we've shown is strength and strength and strength. Mr. Cummings has continuously led, the ANC into being a progressive party, into being a party. I mean, look at today, we had the jamboree, we had the fundraiser and stuff, and ANC partisans, those in Liberia, those in the diaspora, are the backbones behind Mr. Cummings. It is because of us that he continues
Yeah.
to wake up every morning and be intentional about how he wants to change Liberia. And we should continue the work that we're doing. And I tell people, I do my Facebook post. If 10 persons will read it, I've gotten to 10 persons in a day. If 30 persons will read it, I've gotten to 3 people in a day. If 100 persons will read it, I've gotten to 100 people in a day. So we should continue to share our messaging. We should continue to dispute the lies. We should continue to provide the truth against the propaganda, but most importantly, continue to sell our leader, continue to sell our plans, our visions for Liberian people. And at the end of the day, Liberians will make a choice. 2023 elections will have three choices. And those three choices, they're not Alex Cummings, George Weah, or Joseph Boyka. They're about going back to the past, staying in the present, or embracing the future. And we know the past is Boyka, the present is Weah, and the future is Cummings. Thank you for having me.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mariah. It
man.
was
We look
great
forward
having
to
you,
having you
and this
again.
should not be your last time.
It will not be.
Okay.
All right. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye. Brother Paul, you
Yes,
know,
ma.
uh, back to this issue, right? So here is Liberia. We have gotten so used to the noise making until nothing makes sense any longer to most Liberian, I want to say. So even though Stanton, put out the nonsense yesterday, but if Liberian, the same Liberian, if you go to Liberia today or you on the social media, which you are seeing, or on most of the talk show, they will tell you they support war and economic crime code, right? And since then, nothing has happened in Liberia. Nobody has been prosecuted for economic crime. Nobody has been prosecuted for war crime. What happened to the TRC fact finding? Nothing has happened, right? So many Liberians, I think they should embrace, if they hear that, oh, sanction is coming for certain individual, for example, the name of Benedict Cummings, the video is all on YouTube. If I buy a gun, you understand,
Yeah.
and brought to this country, what happened to it? But you're forgetting to know that guns kill people. And it wasn't under normal circumstances that you bought a gun, okay, for the armed forces of Liberia. But you bought guns for a warring faction that killed hundreds of thousands of people in our country. So if Liberian people were smart enough and they hear that, oh yeah, the American government, even though is how they call it, Liberia is a sovereign nation, are coming with sanctions for certain characters that are being, disturbing this country, that the country can move forward. I think Liberian people should embrace that in a positive way, but not in a negative way. Because I saw the comment that Stanton put out. People were sending in comments. You understand, negative comments and calling Mr. Cummings' name right after Stanton put that nonsense out. And I wrote something under his podcast yesterday or his Facebook live show, and I said, Stanton, you could be held accountable or lawsuit against you for what you say against Mr. Cummings because you put his life in danger. He goes around the community. Mr. Cummings is there tomorrow. He's in the other community campaigning. You understand? And these names, Benedict Cummings, for me, I won't hold it back. He's a criminal, convicted criminal. You understand? So he could pay people to go and harm Mr. Cummings. And you, Stanton, finger will be pointed to you for what you said. Okay? So Liberian people are supposed to embrace the idea if sanction is coming for certain individual, and if you have done nothing wrong, you shouldn't be worried. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, so Mark, you're right. You're right, because the society is so gullible, things can happen. That's why I'm making reference to it. You saw how people were chanting his name, calling him thief, calling him rogue, and they were rushing towards him. So the society is easy to, and this guy, he got 4 radio stations that he played on, although sponsored by the government.
Exactly.
And he trying to incite people. Now, the court case is something else that is turning out. They bring their propaganda that, oh, they meant tamper with document over and over for the past 5 months. Now, Mr. Cummings now decides, okay, since we can't get no hair, no tail for the funding bunker case, I bring international investigator to see whether we tamper with it. Now the fear is if these people come, because in the traditional Liberian sense, say if you pull rope pull bush.
Yeah.
So that rope that will pull bush now is getting to them. That wait a minute, it's not only the investigation, because remember, Liberia is a nation, they only depend on donors.
Yeah.
So when the rope pull bush now and people start questioning these people that they support, no, we're not going to send a dime over there. That is the fear now that come into factor. And you read it, say, regards to the war and economic crime code, that's where it will lead to. How did Euro make his money?
Exactly. So the thing is, Liberian people sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, it confuses me. What do Liberian people really want? Okay, the same people tomorrow, if you take Mr. Cummings out of the picture, they will get in the street, they want war and economic crime code. You saw what happened to the 16 billion, right?
Yes.
That brought people like Dillon today to become a senator today. The 25 million after that nonsensical, the finance minister taking money, put in wheelbarrow, carrying from one shop to another. The tension came about, it gave birth to CCP. But these same people, what they want in the street, advocating for war and economic crime court.
That's
Okay,
right.
so if you have Mr. Cummings that uses his influence, uses his influence to be able to get outside partners to come into the system and say, look, this thing now, it has to stop, and we are putting sanction on certain individual X, Y, Z, Liberian people should be happy about it. But I mean, there's a saying that they say some people know what they want and they have what it takes to make them better, and they know the road to get there, but the idea here is they just don't want to. And that's the situation with Liberia. Liberians will talk the issue, they know what they want, they got the the intellectualism to get it done, but the idea they don't want it done. So personally, Mr. Cummings, he's an obstacle to them.
Yeah, yeah. Having said this, it was a good show. It's good to have Mariah here. And this going forward, we'll have more ANC night. And I just want to tell our audience, we're on a flyer because Mariah has worked directly with Mr. Cummings. So she could have been implicated in the court case. So she was advised by the lawyer for us not to discuss this the court case. So that's why we decided to change the topic to make our listener to know why we didn't talk about the court case, because she one of the people that was in the office and they don't want to implicate her in this. So we didn't bring that up.
But actually, that was very smart. I mean, we should have thought about it, because from her introduction, she's one of the person, the original founder of the CCP, going here and there through the documentation. So if she has said something, if we have asked her a question about and she's a lawyer, she's more inclined to that. So it was so good that we talk different issues. But next time again, we can have her on the show we hope the case be over so we can go deeper and get to know what actually went wrong and who did what.
Yeah. That's right. So I would like to say thanks, Mark. It was a good interaction. When my system crashed, you continued that. I mean, it was great. If you were not there, how come the show was just going to collapse? So I'm grateful you kept the ball going.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
So I'll give you a call right after.
Okay, so I want to say thanks to all those that took their time to listen to us. This is the bottom line. The platform is still growing, and pretty soon we'll be relaying this in Liberia to sell Mr. Cummings' idea, his vision. So it's good to have you here, Mark. It was a pleasure, and I want to say good night to our listener. We'll leave you with this. Say bye-bye.